You're listening to Bigger Than Belief, real stories about real faith with real people whose belief is unbelievable. I'm your host, Adam Duxter.
Thanks for tuning in to Bigger Than Belief. Today is Thursday, March 26th. And today we got an opportunity to share an interview that we've been holding on to for a while now, just looking for the right moment to share it. And I think that time is right now. Jacob Thompson is our guest today, and his story is truly inspiring. He's Minnesota through and through, born in Shoreview, and then went on to be a multisport athlete at Mounds View High School. At one point, he had dreams of going pro. However, as he neared his 20s, he started noticing something was a bit off, and it was hard to tell just what. Until at age 24, Thompson got a diagnosis that would change his life. He had a rare neuromuscular disease known as Friedrich's Ataxia. It makes it hard to walk, and in some cases, for some people, talk. Most who have FA only have a life expectancy between the ages of 30 and 60. Today, Thompson is 32. 8 years have passed since the time of his initial diagnosis, and what he's done in those last 8 years is worth talking about. He's deepened his faith, a renewed, intense devotion to his Christian beliefs. He's also shared his story with tens of thousands of people, from high schoolers to professional football teams. He's also devoted his training to pursuing the 2028 Paralympic Games in rock climbing. He's also a father of several young kids. Simply put, he's making the most of every minute. On this episode, we have an open and honest conversation about grief, anger, and purpose. I hope it's encouraging to you. It was fascinating for me to have. So now we want to share that conversation with Jacob Thompson. Well, we now welcome on a very special guest, someone we've been trying to sit down with now for a while. So I'm glad it's finally happening. Got Jacob Thompson in studio with us today. Jacob, thanks for making time to join us. I know it's been a bit of a back and forth to get us squared away to sit down.
Glad to be here.
You have such a fascinating story, and I love it because there is sports, there is faith, there is life, all kind of encompassed into one story. But for people who haven't met you or don't know your story, I'd love to hear a little bit about just kind of life growing up, kind of, the quick bio, if you will. Yeah. Where you're from, what did life look like for you growing up, and kind of tell me about life today.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Shoreview, Minnesota. Went to Mounds View High School, and just from an early age fell in love with sports. I played baseball, football, and hockey competitively for fun. Played tennis, water skiing, wakeboarding, you name it. I probably played it. And the moment I mark in my history is I was 11 years old. My baseball team won the championship game. I got the game ball, and my coach pulled me aside and said, I think you could play pro baseball someday. Now, did he know what he was talking about? Maybe, maybe not. But as a kid, that really became the dream. Little did I know, I've been unknowingly born with a rare disease. It's called Friedrich's Ataxia, or FA. But it slowly has been taking away my physical abilities my whole life. So I was not diagnosed until I was 24. And so towards the end of high school, started getting slower, getting weaker, not knowing why. And we can get more into this, but really had a crisis of identity. And that is where my faith really came alive. And I learned there's more to life than playing sports. And we can get more into that later. I'll leave it there. That led me to become a young life leader, become a coach. And I thought I would do that forever. When I was 24, I finally was diagnosed. I was told there is no treatment to what you have. You'll be in a wheelchair. You'll have a shortened life expectancy. that really flipped life upside down and kind of led me in a different direction, which I'll be happy to tell you more about. And now me and my wife live in Shoreview. We have 3 small boys, figuring out life one day at a time.
That's, I mean, even with 3 young kids, that is, some days you're thriving, some days you're surviving.
Yeah.
As a dad of 2 young ones, I can empathize with you there. I'm curious, you talk about growing up as an athlete and having sports be your identity. And then you talk about having your faith come in. This is a faith podcast. I'd love to hear, I mean, what was the moment for you where you first said, faith is something that interests me? Was it something you grew up with? Was it something that, happened all at once? What was that introduction for you like?
Yeah. Well, we grew up attending church here and there. I grew up going to a church camp in summers. But as you get older, you have tournaments on the weekends, and church kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. And I was not very interested because I felt like the things that I loved were not engaged with church. So I had to leave behind kind of who I was to go to church and sit and listen and learn stuff that didn't feel like it applied to me. So the big difference in high school, my freshman football and baseball coaches led Young Life, and they invited me and invited my friends, and I found a place where I really felt at home. It was fun. My friends were there, my leaders, they coached me sports, and I felt like the messages were actually like applicable and relatable. So that was kind of the catalyst.
So even in high school, I mean, as sports was the main part of your life, you had faith walking alongside sports in tandem, you would say.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like I was 1 foot in, 1 foot out, with 1 foot into wanting to live my life for God and follow Jesus, and then 1 foot in wanting to be popular and wanting to find fulfillment in the things that you're offered by culture. And in high school, it's like, hey, if you perform well, and if you're popular, and if, girls like you or whatever, this stuff will make you happy and fulfill you. And what I found, looking back, when all that stuff went really well for me, I still never felt fulfilled, and I still never had peace and joy. And just the distinction, I think now, joy surpasses circumstance. So before it was always circumstantial. I only felt as good as I played or how well things were seemingly going. Joy, when you have faith, you can have joy in all circumstances.
You said you're 24 when you were diagnosed with FA. What was life like for you at that time? Because I know you've got the 3 young ones at home and you're married. How old are you now? How long was it since you had that diagnosis?
Now I'm 32.
Okay.
So it's been 8 years. And life, I mean, I was coaching football. I was doing a very physically demanding job, leading Young Life, bringing kids to camp, running all the events, and I was feeling off, and I was feeling some days worse than others. I would feel just physically off balance and not feel right, but I was still playing pickup basketball and you know, playing tennis, playing things with friends. So it was a very confusing time. And it was eventually subtle symptoms became more and more prevalent and more noticeable in my everyday life. And that began the medical journey.
When you get that diagnosis and you're in your prime, I mean, you're 24 years old. Is there a moment where there has to be when you say, why me? Or your faith is put to the test? I mean, especially when it's initially presented to you. What was that moment like for you?
There's kind of a threefold answer. So on one hand, it explained so much questioning of my past up until that point. You know, what happened as an athlete and not living up to any of my expectations. Why I stopped being able to skate and water ski. It answered all those questions. On the other hand, you know, it's devastating news, obviously. You have life pictured for yourself and what life will be like, what kind of dad I'll be, what kind of football coach I'll be. Now all that is gone. So, you know, there's times of feeling hopeless, feeling misunderstood, feeling lonely, feeling like the best is behind you. The reason I said threefold is because the third part of that is the shock factor of like, it didn't sink in right away. You know, I was still living a relatively normal life. So it's hard to imagine in 5 years I'll need a wheelchair. Just seems your brain can't quite grasp that. And it didn't feel real, you know. So it was hard to process. And here I am 8 years later, still processing daily what it means for the future, what it means about my past.
What was the conversations in your prayers like after that? I'm sure it was following a lot of that same threefold, like you said. I mean, there's levels to it, but how did this impact your faith life? How has it impacted your faith life?
That is a great question. There is definitely an element. So 1 out of 50,000 people have my disease. So it's very rare. So there's definitely an element of, you know, why is this happening to me? There's an element of, you know, I believe in miracles and that healing is possible and it happens. So it's like, well, you know, God, if you healed me, wouldn't that be a pretty amazing testimony? right? And so I won't give it all to you now, but I have a 3-part spoken word. It's on YouTube. It's called Metamorphosis. And the first part is really crying out and saying, why is this happening to me? I feel depressed. I wonder, do you hear me? Are you real? And then part 2 is, God answering back and saying, I'm with you. I'm not going to leave you. And I never promised things would be easy in life, but I did promise that I'd be there and work everything for your good. And then the third part is really the resolution of me understanding that. And you can look so many places in the Bible, but, you have the book of Job, where Job is a faithful person, but still endures lots of hardship and questions God's goodness. And then, you have Joseph, who is thrown in prison, abandoned by his family, forgotten, but God uses all that for good. And Joseph, at the end of his life, says, what you meant for evil, God used for good. And me seeing that in my own life of, what was meant to destroy me, led me to know God and to know my purpose, led me to have an impact on the world that I wouldn't have otherwise had. And so, one day at a time, I go back to putting my faith in the fact that everything I'm going through, God can use in a good way. And then eventually, He'll restore everything. And knowing that gives me peace to live it out in real time, if that makes sense.
You said a word just now that I think is really important to a lot of people, which is purpose. And even prior to that point in our conversation, we were talking about identity. If you're a good athlete, your identity can be in sports. Or for a lot of people, their identity is in their job or their career or being a parent or their social status. I'm curious for you, when you get this diagnosis and you're 24 years old, how hard was it to not make that your identity of who you were? And you talked about discovering that purpose. When you discovered that, what was that like for you? And how would you explain at this given point, just the way you see your purpose?
Yeah. I'll see if I can answer the multiple questions.
Sorry, it's a bit of a two-parter.
That's great. When I think of purpose, so I always think if something is complex, it must have been created. And when you create something, you have a purpose for that thing. And so when I speak often, I'll relate it to a flashlight. You would never pick up a flashlight and think it appeared at random. You would think somebody made it, somebody manufactured it. Now, what is the purpose of a flashlight? Is to be a light in the dark. I think that is a perfect example of our lives, that God is the one that made you. That's why you're complex. We have trillions of cells I'm not a scientist, so it could be more. But we have all these parts that have come together to allow us to live and breathe. We're infinitely complex. And so we must have an infinite creator. And he is the one through which we find purpose. Like, for example, you could take a flashlight and you can use it for all kinds of things. You could try and hammer a nail. You could drum. You could throw it at someone you don't like. But you wouldn't know that would not be its creative purpose. And so in life, we can do so many things. They could be good things. They can be bad things. But to find our foundational and fundamental purpose, it needs to come from our Creator. One of my favorite verses, Ephesians 2:10, says, "You are God's masterpiece, or workmanship, or handiwork. You've been created in Christ to do the good things that He's prepared for you." So though we all have different ways that we can do that with our gifts, our personalities, our contexts, underneath all that is that God created us to do good things that glorify Him and that help our neighbors. And that's really how I see purpose. And whatever you do on top of that, if you're an athlete, if you're a businessman, if you're funny, if you're an engineer, you can name a million things. Those are great and they're all secondary. And just the last thing I would say about that, why this is so important, all those secondary things could be taken. They could change. They can disappear in an instant. Playing sports, coaching sports can end in one bad play where you get an injury. Your business overnight algorithm could change, or AI could replace you. Anything that can be taken is not a firm foundation. When faith is your ultimate foundation, nobody can take that away. And that is why it's so important.
Was it hard for you to not make your circumstance and in this diagnosis, was it hard for you to look past that becoming your identity in some ways?
Yeah, definitely. There were days and there are days where, I feel bad for myself, or I wish things were different. You play the what if game. What if this didn't happen to me? And you can go on a whole rabbit trail. Now, I think where people go wrong is they push past that too fast. Grieving is appropriate. Wrestling is okay. It's all over the Bible. People are wrestling, people are weeping, people are questioning God. For me, and I can tell you a story about this, but to me, you have to hold tension. So we have time. I'll tell you a quick story. I love baked goods. Yeah, like cookies, brownies. I especially love cinnamon rolls. So one day in 2020, long story short, I was going to eat this mini cinnamon roll. I was so excited. I microwaved it, buttered it, I couldn't wait. Took a bite and I couldn't taste it. Well, I found out what happened in 2020.
Mm-hmm. You had COVID.
Yep, I had COVID. Couldn't taste it. Later that day, my young 1-year-old son pooped his diaper. I changed it.
Couldn't smell it.
Couldn't smell it. And I started thinking, hey, maybe COVID is not so bad. And that is a funny story, but on a serious note, people lost their lives from COVID. My dad was hospitalized. The world shut down. And so at the end of the day, not being able to smell the poopy diaper was not worth missing out on the beauty, the beautiful tastes and smells that life has to offer. I tell that story because there's a reality of holding tension and being able to say, hey, that diaper stinks. But in life, being able to say, hey, this thing that happened to you is horrible, devastating, challenging. That's okay. And there's beauty in life. There's hope to be had. There's joy to be experienced. And you have to be able to hold the tension of both to really get to a place when you can hold tension. Maybe it's cliche, but I call it turning pain into purpose. When you can hold the tension and still have hope and still have joy and still find purpose, you can take the worst things in your life and turn them into how you impact the world.
Which is what you're doing, because you have spoken now to how many different teams, organizations, clubs? I mean, can you put a number on it?
I can't. I know. I can't put a number. I know it's well over 10,000 people in person, and then online in the millions of views of just trying to make content that shows people turning pain into purpose, not because I think I'm awesome. I just think I have a unique situation, but anyone could apply the same thing to whatever they're dealing with in life.
Whatever hardship, whatever thing that they're going through,
Yeah.
to find some encouragement from what you have to say. Has there been a moment or any that stand out? You've shared again with thousands of people.
Yeah.
Just anything that has come from that you feel like particularly proud of, or just has been extraordinary as you've had the chance to share your story with so many people?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say, I've got thousands of whatever, but I like to screenshot comments or messages that people give and express their encouragement, because when I feel discouraged, I can look back at that and say, it can motivate me to keep going. two kind of cool stories. I mean, there have been a lot, but one cool thing is last year at para climbing nationals, which we'll maybe get into, I kind of a heartbreaker where I missed making the finals by 2 moves. And, you know, it just sucks. Like losing, you know, feeling like, oh, I trained for the whole year to make finals. I missed it and I was bummed. And I made a video like recapping it. I didn't even want to post it, and it took me like a week to finally post it, but somebody right away DM'd me and said, like, hey, my son has FA. We watch all your videos. It's given us hope on our darkest days. And it went on a little bit, but to get a message like that just reminded me why I even post anything on the internet. It's not to say, hey, look at me, look how great I am. What if I won nationals? You know, sure, it could be cool to post, hey, I'm a national champion, blah, blah. But it's almost had more of an impact to post my disappointment and to get a message saying, hey, keep going, keep pressing on. Yeah, another cool one, you know, I speak to so many sports teams, and you don't always know what kind of impact you're having, if anyone cares. And I got a message from a friend saying, I teach a class at the U of M, and I had my students write about one of the most impactful moments of their life. One of my students wrote about you coming to speak to his high school baseball team. And that's like, man, that's why I do it, right? And that just, it's that type of thing of like, that keeps me going.
And that could have been years later after the fact that you had a chance to speak to that team. One of the things I want to ask you about is just about time, because I think for so many people, we're either rushing, trying to get through the next thing. You hear people say like, I can't wait till this week's over, or, you know, until I get through that. Or people just assume that they've got unlimited amounts of time, right? I mean, you don't think about the end. When you have a diagnosis that says, this is how much time you have by the numbers, how does that change your relationship with time? How do you look at time?
Yeah. There are two things I think about happening that happen in my life to good friends. So, and I'm going to tie this all into your question. So, I had a friend who was an all-star college kicker, just had an amazing freshman year. First kick of sophomore year, somebody came in and tore his ACL. And it ended kicking for him. When I speak to sports teams, I talk about that and how, like, hey, any play could be your last play. You should play every stay like that. And we understand that in sports. What we don't always understand is the same thing is true in life. So when I was graduating college, one of my best friends from high school, he had called me. We made a plan to hang out in a few days. And the following day, I got a call that he had had a seizure and passed away. And I literally think about him every day, knowing that, yeah, in sports, any play could be your last. You should play like it. But in life, any day could be your last. And you should live like that. And I think, my diagnosis, who knows how long I'll live and what treatments will come. But that's almost thinking too far ahead. Like, any day could be my last day. And that helps me kind of, like you asked, like, do you stay, feeling bad for yourself? Or, I think when you think this could be my last day, you don't have time to stay in that place. You don't have time to stay bitter. You don't have time to hold a grudge. You want to resolve your arguments and end things always on a good foot. And I just think if we all lived with that reality of the fragility of our lives, it would do us well.
You've been so busy. You're making the most of every moment. You talked about all the speaking that you've been doing, but also your training for the Paralympics in 2028. You talked about the climbing. Where are you at with that process? What does that look like moving forward? We're a couple years out now.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying, to me, rock climbing is about way more than winning a medal. For me, there's the reality of I can't run, catch, throw. I can't go play tennis, go do so many things. But I can rock climb. So I do that and I'm making the most of it. And I think that is kind of a formula for life. There's so many things out of your control. There are things that you can't do. But what can you do? So for me, it's very symbolic. Now, of course, I'm human. I'm competitive. I want to make the USA team. I want to go to the Paralympics. I'm training every day towards that goal. And I don't know, honestly, if I'll make it. It's highly competitive. But I do know for sure I'm going to try. And so at the end of the day, I think about my kids, my boys, and how they'll look at me as their dad. I want them to know for sure my dad was a fighter and he gave his all at what he was doing. And hopefully that will be the thing that will outlive me. a medal would be awesome. That will go away. People forget that. In 4 years, you have new people winning medals. I want to win. I like to win. But I hope what will live beyond me is the lessons, the metaphors, making the most of what you can do, what you can control, being consistent, sacrificing, trying when it's hard, all the stuff that is deeper.
One of the last things I want to ask you about, talking about just kind of the inevitability for all of us that life will end at some point, right? You don't know when it's going to be. It could be today, it could be tomorrow. You just don't know how much time you have. As a Christian, how often do you think about life beyond this life and what that's going to be? Because I've talked to people before who, have some sort of physical ailment or injury, right? They talk about, this isn't going to be with me in this next life. Do you think about that at all, or what that's going to be like, or just, do you think about that time of life, or are you more focused on here? I just always have wondered that.
Yeah, great question. I don't want to misquote, like C.S. Lewis is a great author. It says something about, like, if I have an appetite, that means there must be food. If I thirst, there must be water. If I have a longing for a world beyond our world, which is so corrupt. Every day you turn the news on, and lately, it hits close to home. Everything with ICE, and then just the other day at school, a mass shooting. And it's like our world is so broken. And then you can see that on a world scale, you can see it on a national scale, but you can also see it if you look deep down in yourself and in your family. There's probably some pain, struggle, brokenness. And C.S. Lewis makes a point, like, if I have a longing for something beyond this world, it must exist. And so I think of heaven being a restoration of all things, in Revelation 21 or 2 says, behold, all things have been made new. There's no more tears, suffering, pain. I think about that often, and it helps when you have small kids because they remind you of that. And my sons will say, like, yeah, Daddy, in heaven you'll be able to run and play football with us. And it's powerful to know this life is not the end of the story. The injustice of the world doesn't get the final say. If there is an afterlife, I wanna be on the right side of that. And that is a big thing. Like, for me, if you don't think about the afterlife, what if it is real? If you don't believe in God, what if God is real? Wouldn't you want to at least dive into the evidence, the arguments, and know, like, make an informed decision about such a big thing. And that's where I encourage people, like, you know, wherever anyone's at, it's like, hey, well, why don't you why don't you look at the evidence? Why don't you pray? Why don't you explore and find out, like, what you actually believe instead of just brushing it off? Because the reality of heaven, for me, is what gives me the hope as I live in the broken world to try and be a light with the flashlight example I gave.
I mean, such a focus on encouragement. But if there's anything else that you would want, if people take one thing away, from hearing from you, what would you want that to be?
I think it says this on my website, but every obstacle, it's an opportunity to climb higher. So when you think about rock climbing, you're able to climb by grabbing onto the obstacles. And what I would encourage anyone in life is, the biggest obstacles in your life, within them lie your greatest opportunities, that you can turn pain into purpose. And then I would just say, I know you said one thing, but the other thing is, like, explore what you believe about God and about purpose, and really try and find the answer. And I think, I'm not a huge, like, debater of religions or worldviews or whatever, but I just think, the Bible says, seek and you will find. So I just encourage anyone, seek truth, and I believe you'll find it. But if you never seek it and just go about living your life, you won't find it.
Jacob, we've been trying for months to have this conversation. I'm glad that we finally did. I really am. And I'm glad it worked out for both of us to sit down and talk. Quickly, where can people find you? How can people get connected with you?
Yeah. JacobThompson.org. That has everything you need to know. If you're out there listening and you are a business leader or a coach or a school administrator, I would love to come speak to your group and give them tools to build resilience. JacobThompson.org. All my socials are JT Climb Higher. JT Climb Higher. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. And you can see my journey. I post lots of updates.
Awesome. Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I appreciate it. I hope this message finds the right people at the right time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time to listen to Bigger Than Belief. If you're new here, we do this every week. Real stories about real faith and real people. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a minute to rate this podcast 5 stars wherever you are listening to us currently. Seriously, folks, that makes a huge difference for us. If you've been a listener of us for a while too, please, if you have a minute, drop a review. for us on any of those platforms also. Again, this helps us be seen by even more people. We'll be right back Thursday with another brand new episode, Passover. In the meantime, folks, be well. We'll see you then.
I'm Maria Lizignoli, and this podcast comes to you from the WCCO podcast studio.
I'm Johnny Connor, and this is where you'll find the latest news of the day with us on 4 Things to Know.
I'm Mariel Mose, and I bring you the stories behind the female athletes redefining the game on Women in Sports.
I'm Adam Duxter. Join me for a deep dive into faith and what it means to Minnesotans around the state on Bigger Than Belief.
Stay in the know on the go with the WCCO podcast studio. Go to WCCO.com/podcasts.